This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders.
Some might say this is in their blood. In 1899, Australian rugby was thrown into mass panic. 11 years earlier, a pair of former cricketers from Nottingham had organised the first ever British Isles rugby tour to Australia. The best players from England and Scotland coming together to play a series of exhibition matches down under. However, it wasn't until 3 years later, on the team's second tour to South Africa, that the idea really started to take shape and captured the public's imagination. This tour was to culminate in a free test series against the South African national team. The best players against the best players. A showpiece, a real competition edge. That idea was repeated in Bokland a few years later, the newly coined Lions winning 3 tests on both tours, but nonetheless boosting the profile of rugby enormously in South Africa. The success of these 2 tours encouraged the New South Wales Rugby Football Union to reach out and see if they themselves could receive a British Isles team once again in a couple of years' time, potentially even building to a similar free-act showpiece at the end. The British players loved the ideas. The Australians wanted it to go ahead, and so organisers immediately set about putting things together, scheduling travel and 21 matches, all against local sides. The tour was ready to go and excitement was building. There was just one problem. Australia didn't have a national team. The first ever Wallabies team was pulled together in a matter of weeks, specially to play these 3 games. A simple merger of New South Wales and Queensland, 6 players from one and 9 from the other with no subs, reserves. The team didn't even have a coach, selected by a panel of officials. The assumption was all 4 tests would be a walkover against this newly found team for the Lions. And then we came to the second half of the first test, with things much closer than people expected. Up pop wingers William Evans and Alonzo Spragg. 2 brilliant tries from either extreme saw the soon-to-be-named Wallabies to a historic first ever win on their first ever outing, winning 13-3 or 19-5 in today's money. The last few years of Wallaby rugby have been rough. A team used to being on top ever since that first day in the Sydney Sun have been struggling. Out in the group stages of a World Cup for the first time ever. Shockingly narrow wins over Georgia and Portugal, their only victories of 2023, just making things worse from an already rough 2022, with daily behind-the-scenes drama overshadowing most things happening on the pitch, which, frankly, often proved to be a blessing in disguise. With 1 year to go, last July, many were already counting the Wallabies out, calling the tour coming in now, just a few weeks' time, a foregone conclusion. 3-0 to the Lions, nailed on. And that might not be the only nilling we see in the test series. The Wallabies are going to struggle. And then, in a heartbeat, the narrative changed. Inspired by new coach Joe Schmidt and a generation of fantastic young talent, the Wallabies beat England at Twickenham for the first time in over a decade. They romped home in Cardiff by a record margin, and they almost had Ireland too, giving new hope and life to fans previously bracing themselves for the tour headed their way. So, how has Joe Schmidt added such a fresh air to the Wallaby cause? What should we expect from them this summer? And perhaps most importantly, can the Wallabies genuinely, really replicate their original counterparts and beat the British and Irish Lions this summer, or winter if you're in Australia? I should keep a better track of that. Whilst the Lions went on to win the series overall in 1899, a further comparison sits in the style of play the 2 teams brought. British journalists travelling with the team were shocked by the speed Australia played with, their forwards' ability to handle the ball and run angles, and their incredible fitness, outlasting the Lions in that opening test. Joe Schmidt might have sprouted up out the ground across the Tasman, but there is something perfect about him coaching the Wallabies. Despite spending most of his career in Ireland and France, Schmidt's style of play has always felt very Australian. The focus on skill set and speed, on all the things that first ever side rode to their win. However, for every overlap in style and approach, the details of Schmidt's game plan are so anti-Aussie they probably qualify for a New Zealand passport. Schmidt is a percentages man. When he was in charge of Ireland, he wouldn't allow the team to get within 5 metres of the sideline because the risk of losing the ball if they went any closer became so great. He banned offloads end of because the percentage chance you were going to drop the ball was so much higher than any other form of pass. Lineouts rarely went to the tail because the opposition were more likely to nick it the longer it was in the air. Schmidt's Ireland and Leinster teams were like a hypochondriac clown or Tom Cruise, desperate to entertain yet so terrified of something going wrong that every rough edge got smoothed, sanded off. This is so against the philosophies upon which Wallaby rugby have have been built for generations. The ideas of backing yourself, taking risks and pulling things another player in the same position for another team would never even dream up. As well as their proudest tradition, transforming yourself from the loveliest bloke in the world off the field to the biggest prick of all time once you cross that playing threshold. 4 more years, boys. Schmidt has now had 3 campaigns in charge, a test series against Wales and Georgia, a rugby championship, and a tour to Europe of their own. And I think month by month we've seen these two approaches, these two contrasting styles of Schmidt and Australia, gradually marry up more and more as compromises, yes, came in, but more likely and more commonly, ingenious solutions are reached and discovered. Over the Wales series, the Wallabies lent into Joe Ball, a more sensible, pragmatic approach, yet when they got a chance they still were encouraged to play, just see what was in front of them. Steadily, however, over the next 2 campaigns, we saw a pretty clear pattern, a map for play establish itself. The Wallabies' current game model is pretty simple when you boil it right down. The team has some incredibly inventive and interesting shapes and structures that we'll get onto shortly, we'll come back to those, and they run variations on them repeatedly until either they score, which is lovely, but unless you're playing against Wales, far from a guarantee, it doesn't happen all that often from simple phase play, or, more likely, more commonly, and more a factor in the game, they draw a penalty, at which point everything changes. It's as though the moment the referee sticks his arm out, Schmidt ball goes out the window and the hardwired Wallaby instincts take over. This is a near perfect example. After a great carry by Valentini, the Wallabies have essentially fallen into the most basic rugby possible. One up, pick and go carries with the team massively condensed until Stewart is caught offside. The ref sticks his arm out and the entire approach suddenly changes. Tupou doesn't even have anyone outside him, yet flicks it to simply get the pill outside the English defence. Peach smashes it up, and having got on the outside, this forces the England players who were previously here to work incredibly hard to drift out to get into position, hence causing the likes of Jamie George here to overwork, opening a gap on their outside for McDermott just next the ruck. He darts right through and throws the offload for Wilson to score. And this one might be even better still, even if it doesn't result in a try. It's a lovely line-out move here, right? Simple as anything. Valentini hits a brilliant line against the grain to get a one-on-one contact, making it some 5 yards over the gain line. The Wallabies then play 6 successive phases of one-off runners of pick and goes. It's 6 phases with 5 passes. And then the referee calls advantage. And the Wallabies instantly flick it out the back. Wilson offloads to Suoli, who breaks the line. Ikitau then offloads, and instead of smashing up, Angus Bell goes on a little caper, and eventually then, here we are, recycles. The Wallabies' fine position is no different in shape to the other phases when they're just crashing up. The only difference is intention. Frost flicks it back, and Lolosei was so tight, he draws Slade's eye and opens up the space for Tupou outside him, who flings it just wildly over his head to keep the ball alive. Valentini popping up for right to go through. Kiefer Ben causes back for being a forward pass, but I think other referees may have given this as a try. They go from 5 passes and 6 phases before the advantage to 3 and 10 after it, including a few more risky balls and one truly speculative offload. Yet it is better than the other truly speculative thing that the Wallabies had been doing under Eddie Jones, trying to build a website out of ham. Thankfully, Joe Schmidt introduced them to Squarespace. So many of that Wallaby squad were desperate to put together a sleek, beautiful, stunning website, preferably with real ease, maybe with an easy to use and implement storefront, some SEO features, all of these. And whilst Eddie went, just use a slab of meat, mate, just make your website out of ham, Schmidt knew Squarespace inside out. It was the most effective, efficient, beautiful way to build a website. The players had assembled a gorgeous new site in no time at all, able to track their stats from within Squarespace's own integrated features so simply, just like Joe would have liked. And if you want to do the same, you can add the link in the description and use the offer code Squid Rugby to save yourself some money on a website like Joe Schmidt would want you to do. Australia's first few phases are almost always basic plays, just looking to stress rather than break a defence. Here it's a simple ball to right, sliding round, hoping he can find a step one-on-one. However, once a penalty is drawn a moment later, the approach is no longer conservative. It's this bullshit, this adventure, trying to get the ball wide and into positions to break them by any means necessary. Without an advantage, the Wallabies often, perhaps too easily, can fall into this bland back and forth rugby that even Wales can defend. But with an arm out, Australia now play probably the second most adventurous unstructured game in the sport to France. Now, pivoting your attack on the opposition doing something daft would be a risky strategy were it not for Sergeant Joe's trademark attention to detail throughout the full team and one massive secret weapon in the Australian Arsenal. A classic slice of fried gold named Nick Frost. Though he's increasingly making a name for himself doing shit like this, Frost is a proper old school lock who loves a bit of grindhouse work. This is a prime example for the Brumbies. Taulima here is stopped just short of the line, but Frost's double effort is fantastic. He bounces out from the ruck, takes a second to assess, then tackles the tackler. There simply isn't enough weight around now, and Taulima flops over the line. Frost won't get an assist on his stats for this, but he's the one who caused the try to be scored by removing the weight, removing the tackler, and it's these kinds of contributions he has around the field constantly all game long. Here, his clean out, for instance, moves Roland's way past the ruck, forcing him to become now the first defender instead of the guard and opening a big gap on the inside for Loliseo to go right through. And so, with a guy with this strong a nose for shithousing, for bending the laws without a referee ever noticing, Schmidt has obviously lent on him to add little 1 and 2 percenters to the Wallaby attack. In that early example, for instance, he just holds his knee on the tackler to pin him into the ruck. It's this kind of stuff he does all game long, and he isn't the only one. Increasingly, we're seeing more and more Wallabies do stuff like this. Karevi here spins into contact, meaning Jack Morgan, previously on his side, is now behind him, and Suoli just drops on him immediately, pinning him in. The referee sticks his arm out a moment later, or here, Bell deliberately flops over the top of both of them to pin him in, and whilst the referee doesn't fall for it in this instance, many would. They're always looking to buy penalties rather than just waiting for them to occur. Australia are getting better at this very cute, subtle side of the game all the time, though I will quickly apologise to any Aussie fans if it happens to turn out that Ben O'Keefe, Nico Ramashikeli or Andrea Piardi happen to watch this video and now start to pick up on it. Sorry, triple to Nick Frost in particular. Whilst many teams get bolder once an advantage is called and take more risks, that isn't the only thing that's happening here. Australia's entire structure seems to change and almost simplify once a penalty is coming. Their play becomes much less orchestrated as they tip from a fascinating new shape Schmidt seems to be pioneering to the positionless rugby approach their ex-committed Sapoku to try and create even before moving to Japan. This against Wales is a classic bit of positionless rugby. Off a solid scrum, Kellaway simply carries, but Ben Thomas goes slightly high, so an advantage is called. The pack then work around the corner, and whilst Valentini is a permanent source of front foot ball, he's got the entire Welsh team marking him, by which I mean just Jack Morgan on his own, who's worked incredibly hard to get into position and flies out of line. Morgan would crack him behind the gain line here, but Valentini instead ships it on and forces the outside centre, Llewellyn, to come in. Because they've got the hardest worker on the Welsh team out of the game now in Morgan, quick ball here means they're essentially attacking unopposed. None of the Welsh forwards are wide enough, and the first of the only 2 backs out there are now sucked in. Rollins just about gets there in time, but in a perfect metaphor for his career over the last 18 months, out of nowhere, Will Rollins just falls over. Loliseo is in the ruck to generate faster ball, so Karevi takes over at 10 and gets the attack going. They can twist this disorganised Welsh attack out of shape with ease to backdoor flicks in a row, putting Karevi over for what would be a try, if not for a genuinely incredible try-saving tackle from Tom Rogers. It's so easy to frame these 2 contrasting approaches, and I admit I have just done that, the structure and the loose play, as being Schmidt versus Australia, but maybe the bigger component in this is less a clash of styles and more rugby's biggest exporter of structured attack, having to now reckon with an era where unstructured scenarios have become the most valuable form of attack, something we detailed in a video a couple of weeks ago. The Wallabies have responded in a number of ways. They almost exclusively kick contestably now. Every kick is in the air to chase. The new blocking laws coming in a mere week or so before the start of that much improved autumn campaign no doubt playing a part. Joseph Swali has become the aerial headline, but Andrew Kellaway, Dylan Peach and Max Jorgensen are all excellent chasers, particularly Kellaway, who is about as good as any winger out there. This frequently creates chaotic scenarios with the Wallabies regularly looking with tap backs instead of outright wins, sometimes granting a knock-on advantage and hence one shot at something wild. We've also seen an evolved view of the fly half position. Joe Schmidt, to me, feels like the coach who finally found a way to use Noah Loliseo fully, properly. His natural game has always been less of an old school boss what you see fly half and more of an inside centre who takes on responsibilities himself, carries more, and generally just acts as more of a membrane rather than the guy running the team. As such, Schmidt has spread the playmaking duties between the entire backline, allowing Loliseo to come in and run hard lines like this, to pick angles, to use his actual points of difference as a rugby player instead of asking him to be a more boring player than he naturally is for the good of the team. As a result, we're both seeing Loliseo play much better, but also Australia use the likes of Tom Wright and Samu Karevi to step in at fly half. but it goes beyond that. Here, with Lolaseo in the ruck, Kellaway, as the closest back, floods round and steps in at 10. Unlike most wingers given this responsibility, he doesn't look to do too much. He looks up, sees Slade in the starting box to target him, and he just takes one step forward to engage him with the ball, then gives the simple short pass. The England line is now in tatters, its defensive captain taken out for nothing, and Sueli can unleash right to score in the corner. All from Kellaway identifying and giving a simple pass. Critically, however, we've also seen this spread to Super Rugby level. The Brumbies in particular have been going extremely well this season, and we've seen Tom Wright given an expanded role in the team. He's played all but 83 minutes of the Brumbies season and is regularly being used now much more as a playmaker, stepping in at 10 to get used to that role, hopefully allowing him to play more comfortably in it at test level. However, this playmaking becomes particularly important when you take into consideration the beautiful shape Schmidt has birthed with Australia. As ever, taking cues from everywhere and thinking about the game so laterally and brilliantly, Joe Schmidt has essentially started to move the game on from the arrowhead shape that formed the basis of pretty much every attack going back to the All Blacks coining the 1-3-3-1 a decade or so ago, and instead shifted to a more even set of triangles. There's the magic word, the one to get used to, triangles. This is the theory, right? The limit of a 1-3-3-1 or 2-4-2 or whatever is that you eventually run out of numbers. Each player can only exist in one group, creating a limit on your attack. Eddie Jones attempted to solve this by changing the numbers in those groups consistently, but you still end up with the same number of guys being involved. However, in a completely inspired riff on Eddie's bullshit, Schmidt, who, importantly, is serving as the Wallabies attack coach as well as their head honcho, has created something really new and exciting. Instead of adding up to 8, the groupings for Australia total how many ever players are currently on their feet, so likely 12 or 13, minus 2. 2 lads stand on either touchline. Critically, these almost always aren't the wingers. More often, an edge forward, even a prop, rather than a flanker or number 8. But they look to stretch the defence all the same. The actual winger, instead, is used as a proper work rate position. Just track Max Jorgensen here in a clip we'll come back to. The way he works from one touchline to the other, carries the ball, then is right back up to his feet and over on the opposition touchline again in a matter of about 10-12 seconds. It's insane. Players with Australia instead form these triangles. The first one off the ruck is simple, a crash up, a distributor, often acting as either the very front or very back of the pod, but this allows him or whoever's further back to act as an element in the next group along as well. The triangles are interlinked. The third point on one is the first in another. It allows you to essentially triple the number of players you're using in these shapes by every third one being involved in 2 at once. As per the use of Lolaseo, Schmidt has seemingly moved beyond only trusting the 10 and maybe 12 to play make. The critical try against England came from flanker Fraser McWright popping up in a spot where most teams would use a 10 to distribute and make decisions and call that ball out. Every third player instead now scans, distributes the other 2 running lines and angles to engage the defence. It doesn't matter who they are, anyone can play that role. Front row, back row, second row, 10, fullback, whatever. The shape is best played off an edge, so we often see the Wallabies run something like this to simply get the ball wide, and likewise it only really works effectively off front football, but even 1 inch of go forward is enough. As such, Rob Valentini and Angus Bell seem to be given a much broader, more open roles. As the 2 biggest carriers in the team, if they sniff a chance to smash it up and make an extra few inches, they have more license to abandon shape and just run whatever line will get them going forward seemingly than anyone else who has to stay within their position. Once they are on top, it looks a bit like this. The Wallabies have 5 waves of attack here, with 3 players, including both wingers, reloading into the shape behind. However, the real detail is less how they start or even how they end up, but how they connect. It looks like this, right? If we go through it slowly. Tom Wright is at 10 with Lolaseo just getting back up to his feet here and forms triangle 1 here. Karevi comes into the boot and forms triangle 2 involving the players from before. Kellaway then wraps around and forms triangle 3 number here, with Jorgensen now joining the party behind and forming triangle 4. Valentini mildly overruns this and it allows Llewellyn to adjust and make the tackle, but it so almost opens up. If Valentini runs a better line, they score. Or more likely, if they get a 5th triangle in place, which they almost do, they're 1 player short here, they probably score. Instead of wave on wave or the positioning system taking root, Schmidt has mixed and matched and created something that feels fresh and exciting. This movement is kind of amazing, taking elements of Gregor Townsend's Hua Pilotu shape that we've talked about countless times before, so difficult to defend if it comes off front foot ball. However, there is a a real concern. In and around the 22, it becomes much less effective as the opposition defensive line grows in numbers with both wingers joining full on and the Wallabies just staying flatter. It's a classic Joe Schmidt manoeuvre. If you run a play where somebody who's going to receive the ball starts 20 metres behind the gain line, you're risking potentially losing 20 metres. So if you're in the 22, ending up back on halfway isn't worth it, so the Wallabies play flatter once they get closer to the line, and hence have less time and chance to get these passes away, playing much less dynamic rugby the closer they get to the try line. That isn't to say it's impossible that they don't do it at all. Tom right here scores off a lovely 2-triangle shape, but he only really makes it because of an absolute Prendergast from Blair Murray. The play itself is really nice. This doesn't look threatening at all for Wales initially, so they feel they've got it more than covered with a few defenders here, but the players hitting position late create that first triangle. Lolaseo then creates the second as Wright wraps around. He draws win it, and whilst Murray should make this tackle, even if he did, it would still be a 10-15 metre net gain for Australia. These triangles aren't only about line breaks, but also opening tiny gaps to create half breaks and opportunities to get big carriers over the gain line. Against England and Scotland, we saw them use the likes of Wilson and Gleeson out wide to get them going forward. It's a really, really smart system that I'm excited to dig into more and see if more teams start to take on. Because ultimately, this Wallaby team is incredibly smartly coached. It's potentially on the cutting edge of something exciting with some outstanding young talent and a few real difference makers. Rob Valentini is properly world class to the point I just sort of want him and Jack Morgan to do monthly Zoom sessions with Sergio Parise to just say, well, it's not my fault for an hour. He's one of the most complete carriers out there. His ability to pick a line and use his size takes him far beyond so many other big lads. This recent try is a perfect example. I've seen hundreds of guys his size try and do this before, but very few succeed. Yet Valentini's innate knack for when to drop the shoulder, how to ride a tackle, what line to pick, the method to initiate contact on his own terms so he can control it, gets him over the line. Take McDermott, also might not be in the top 10 number 9s in the world, but for me, he is absolutely nailed on the number 1, the best number 21 out there. There is nobody on the planet more capable of changing a game in the last 20 from scrum half. The previous clip against England is a perfect example. Jake Gordon hadn't sniped once in half an hour, only for McDermott to come on and do it twice in a minute, creating a try. And Tom Wright has been playing arguably the best rugby of his career over the last 12 months. A very talented player always, made somehow drastically better by appearing convinced that he's the greatest player Union has ever seen, and his form of the last year has made you start to think maybe he's got a point. I'm so excited to see what he can do against the Lions. Because here's the thing, the history of Australian rugby is built so heavily upon guys believing like Tom Wright does. It's built upon reinvention, reinvigoration, on finding this world-beating self-belief and using it to actually beat the world. The Wallabies, 5 years before their first World Cup were written off, thought of as a fading superpower. Their first Grand Slam tour, a few years before that, came off the back of a side described as their worst ever. And to look over every Lions tour to Australia is to see a list of times the Wallabies were ignored, written off, shunted, told they stood no chance, followed by a parade of victories, upsets, and series wins. The 1899 team came from nowhere. They hadn't existed weeks earlier, yet beat the first Lions side to ever truly combine all 4 home nations in their first ever test match. Pulling off results like the ones Joe Schmidt will ask of Australia this July and August is embedded somewhere deep in the blood of every single player to ever pull on the green and gold. The urge to compete, to fight, to win, to pull off things nobody else would ever dream of, to turn and say words that might echo down the ages. 12 more years, boys.
Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it from both me and from Wally here. This is just the start, this is part of ongoing Lions coverage. We had a look at how the Lions will likely play on the basis of the squad and Andy Farrell's history and so on a few weeks ago, so please go and have a look at that. We had a video on Sasha Feinberg and Go Mazzulli. We've got loads more coming from the USA. On the second channel, More Squad Rugby, there's plenty more as well. We're having a look at the 2 major finals this weekend, the URC and the Premiership, so please go and have a look there. And thank you to the Sports Channel on Patreon. You make all of this possible. Like, genuinely, it makes such a difference in terms of us just being able to get this stuff out there, because it's very time consuming to look for a lot of these. This video took months of working on in the background and just trying to get it done, and Wally hugely appreciates it. And yeah, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate all the support and effort, and we'll see you very soon for more rugby.